There's a moment, right before your world splits in two. You don't see it coming. You're just sitting in a chair, in a room that smells like bad coffee, and then someone reads your name out loud in front of everyone you love, and everything you thought was true about your life quietly dies. Before this story goes any further, take 1 second to subscribe. Because what this woman discovered under a broken cabin in the Alaskan wilderness will change the way you think about worth, family, and what it truly means to inherit something. My name is Brin. I was 34 years old the winter my parents disappeared into the wilderness and left their entire lives to the lawyers. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I ran a small land survey business out of a one-room office in a town most maps don't bother naming. My fiancé Marcus was beside me. My brother Dale had flown in from Miami wearing a coat too thin for Alaska, like a man who'd already decided he wasn't going to be cold very long. We sat across a long conference table from an attorney named Hannah Brower. And Hannah began to read. Dale received the Miami property. 4 bedrooms. Ocean views. Appraised at $2.2 million. His wife Vivian's shoulders dropped 2 inches. The way shoulders do when they've been carrying dread for months and it finally lets go. Then Hannah slid a thin folder across the table toward me. A cabin, in a remote drainage north of Caribou Bend. That was all. 150 miles from the nearest town. No road access. No phone signal. No plumbing. Just a small wooden structure leaning against the dark edge of the Alaskan wilderness. Dale laughed. Not cruelty exactly. Relief. Dad gave me my empire, Brin, he said, leaning back like a man who'd won. He gave you a shack. That tells you everything. Marcus squeezed my hand. But when I looked over at him, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the thin folder. And I watched something shift behind his eyes. By the end of that same week, the man I was supposed to marry had shown me who he really was. We were in his kitchen in Fairbanks. The heat was ticking in the vents. And he began unloading things he'd apparently been holding for years. He told me about the development deal he had on the river. Permits stuck. Banks calling. He'd been quietly counting on what I'd inherit, to save him. He'd been counting on me the whole time. Just not the way I thought. How do they leave you nothing? He kept saying. His voice getting sharper each time. Then he stopped. He looked at me across the kitchen like I was something he was returning. And he said it. A frozen shack is exactly what you deserve, Brin. You're a pathetic loser. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I didn't cry. I took the ring off my finger. I set it on his counter. The small click it made was the only sound in the room. And I buttoned my coat. In my pocket, my fingers found a brass compass. My father had given it to me the day I completed my first land survey on my own. The cold weight of it steadied my hand. I drove 4 hours home through black ice. Didn't turn the radio on once. And somewhere in that silence, I made a decision. I was going to go see that worthless shack with my own 2 eyes. Because if everyone in my life had decided I was worth nothing, I at least owed it to myself to find out if they were right. You don't just drive to my father's cabin. You charter a bush plane out of Bettles from a pilot named Cale who's been flying these routes for 30 years. You land on a gravel strip that isn't on most maps. You load a snow machine. And then you ride 40 miles of frozen wilderness, and hope. The last stretch nearly broke me. Wind came off the tundra in sheets. My goggles iced over. My hands went numb inside 2 pairs of gloves. But I knew how to follow a frozen creek in a whiteoat. My father had taught me when I was 12. So I dropped my speed, found the creek, and followed its spine the way he showed me. And then through the wall of white. I saw it. Small. Leaning. Half buried in snow against a stand of black spruce. But the roof was sound. The shutters were tight. The woodpile was stacked high and squared off with a care that stopped me cold. A man doesn't keep a worthless thing like that. Inside, I got the barrel stove going and stood over it until my fingers came back. And then I started to look around. His wool coat hung on a peg by the door, brushed clean. A shelf of survey texts, spines unbroken, dusted. Maps covered an entire wall, pinned in neat, overlapping squares. Decades of careful work from a man everyone had written off as a bush hermit. The smell hit me last. Wood smoke and spruce. The exact smell I'd been chasing at my own window all winter. And it folded my knees. I sat on the edge of his bunk and let the grief come. Then I stood up. Because I'm a surveyor. And surveyors read the ground for what it's trying to say. I walked the floor slowly. And near the bunk, one plank gave under my boot with a sound that was wrong. A hollow note beneath solid silence. A space where there should have been none. I crouched. Ran my thumb along the seam. And my heart started going hard and slow. I found a flat bar in his toolkit. And I pried the board up. The space beneath was cedar-lined. Dry as bone after a hard winter. Inside, a roll of oilcloth tied with waxed cord. Heavy. When I lifted it, my hands weren't quite steady. When the cloth fell open across the floor, I forgot to breathe. 40 years of survey work. My father's handwriting across topographic sheets lead with geological overlays, drill site notations, sample tags, elevation lines so fine they looked like something printed. Not the casual notes of a hobbyist. The meticulous, secretive life's work of a man who had found something, and told no one. Tucked at the center of the roll was a sealed envelope. The paper gone soft with age and cold. Across the front, in his handwriting. For the one who comes to look. Not for Dale. Not for anyone else. For whoever cared enough to make the trip. I spread the maps across the floor. I worked them the way I'd work a professional job. And what I found pulled the warmth right out of the room. Those drill site notations weren't decoration. They were a methodical grid of core samples, each logged with depth, date, and the shorthand I'd seen my father use my entire life. And against a half dozen of them, the marks a surveyor makes when the ground gives back more than dirt. Mineralization. Heavy concentration. A formation running beneath the creek, beneath the spruce flats. Beside it, pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper, he had written one word. Confirm. Below that, a later date. And one more word. Confirmed. I sat back on my heels and felt the room tilt. Then I picked up the sealed envelope. Broke the flap open. The satellite phone in my pack started buzzing across the floor like a chainsaw in the silence. I nearly came out of my skin. It was Dale. "Hey sis," he said, and his voice was wrong from the first word. Too warm. Too careful. "Just checking you got home okay." Dale had never once checked whether I got home okay. I told him I was running errands. I don't know why I lied, except that 40 years of my father's secrecy had crawled into my blood the second I opened that roll of cloth. Dale laughed. Let it go too quickly. When he hung up, I sat in the firelight with the dead phone in my hand, and understood that the easy part was over. I looked down at the open envelope, and I finally read my father's letter. It wasn't long. He didn't waste words on paper any more than in life. He wrote that if I was reading this, I had come to the cabin. And that meant I was the kind of person he had hoped one of his children would turn out to be. He wrote that the land held something. That he had spent his life confirming it, and would spend the rest of it protecting it. Then he wrote, "Don't trust the number until you've sat with it. A number that big makes liars out of good people and fools out of the rest." Folded behind the letter was a single page on the letterhead of an Anchorage geological assay firm. I've read thousands of survey reports in my career. I knew exactly how to read this one. My eyes went straight to the bottom, where someone had penciled a rough valuation in the margin. My hand started to shake before my brain caught up. I pressed my palm over the page. Made myself breathe. Outside, the creek groaned under its ice. And then I read the number. $500 million. The leaning shack that everyone threw away sat on top of $500 million in copper, gold, and rare earth minerals. The kind of minerals the whole world had started fighting over. And my father had known about it for 40 years, and told no one. The calls started coming quickly after that. A man named Garrett Roth. A resource fund out of Anchorage. Expensive coat. Soft hands. A smile built from 100 closed deals in towns like mine. He didn't waste time. "Ms. Ingram," he said, "I think we both know what your father found." Then he told me something that turned my stomach cold. He'd already had a conversation with Dale. Of course he had. Dale called that same night. The warmth was gone. In its place was the brother I actually grew up with. He said the trust distribution was looking questionable. No judge would believe their father left a fortune to one child and a flood zone house to another. He wanted to revisit it. Said 50-60 would be fair. I asked him which way. He laughed and didn't answer. Marcus came back with flowers he had never once bought me when we were together. He drove 4 hours. He stood in my office doorway looking handsome and sorry, and said things that sounded like love until you listened carefully and heard the money underneath every word. I let him finish. Then I said quietly, a pathetic loser, with $500 million. He blinked. Funny, I said, how the number changes what I'm worth to you. I told him to take his flowers. And as he drove away, I noticed I wasn't even angry. I was clear. Because a man who tells you who he is when he thinks you have nothing, has given you the most useful gift there is. I just hadn't unwrapped it the first time. I called Hannah Brower. I asked her one question. If I wanted to make sure this land could never be mined, never be sold, never be destroyed, how would I do it, so it actually held? She walked me through it carefully. Under Alaska law, a landowner can grant a conservation easement. Permanent. Recorded against the title. Binding every future owner. Forever. On top of that, I could convey the mineral estate itself into a charitable land trust, separating it from any owner who might be tempted. Putting it beyond reach. Once it's recorded, Hannah said, it runs with the land. Even if your brother somehow overturned the distribution and took the parcel, he would take it already restricted. A fortune that no longer exists to fight over. I told her to file. The conveyances went to the recorder's office 2 days before the settlement meeting Dale's lawyers had scheduled. The meeting where they planned to corner me, pressure me, buy me. They were all so busy planning their ambush that not one of them thought to check whether the quiet surveyor from Caribou Bend had simply gone to the courthouse first. The night before the meeting, Hannah called. It's done, she said. Recorded and indexed. The easement and the mineral conveyance are both on the title. Brin, it's permanent. I sat very still and let the words settle into my bones. In the morning, I drove to Fairbanks. The conference room had the same bad carpet and bad coffee as the day this all began. Except this time, I walked in last. And I walked in calm. Dale. Vivian. His lawyer. Marcus against the wall, lounging like a man who'd bought a front row seat. And Roth in the corner, patient and expensive, with a checkbook I could practically smell. I sat down. One folder. That was all I had. I watched them read it as weakness. I let them. Dale's lawyer performed his theory of the case. Undue influence. A scheming younger daughter. A hidden fortune. He said the word fortune 4 or 5 times, savoring it. Roth nodded along. Marcus smirked. Then Dale leaned forward and said the thing that lived deepest in him. You think you're so much better than us. Dad always loved the land more than his own kids. And you're just like him. Cold. Marcus took his turn. Said he could testify about my mental state after our breakup. Said it smoothly. The way a man practices something in a mirror. Roth slid a check across the table face up. The number doing the talking for him. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Think about my children, she whispered. They didn't do anything to you. For kinds of pressure, contempt, threat, money, and grief, aimed at one woman with one folder. I uncrossed my hands. I opened the folder. There's nothing here for any of you to fight over, I said quietly. There hasn't been for 2 days. You just didn't check. I slid the first document to the center of the table. This is a conservation easement on the cabin parcel. It permanently prohibits mining, extraction, subdivision, and development. It binds me, and every owner who comes after me, forever. Roth's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. I slid the second document beside it. This is a conveyance of the entire mineral estate into a charitable land trust, with the Regional Native Corporation as steward. As of 2 days ago, I don't own the minerals. No one does. They cannot be bought, sold, or pulled from the ground. Not by me. Not by you. Not by anyone. The room had gone very quiet. I turned to Dale. You're contesting a trust to win a fortune that no longer exists. Win or lose your case, the restriction runs with the land. There is nothing under that ground you can reach. Then I looked at Roth. Your notice of interest is against a parcel that can never be developed. Exactly the way my father wanted it. And finally, I turned to my brother. And I gave him back his own words. Gently, because cruelty was never the point. You told me a shack tells you everything, Dale. I paused. It did. You just never once asked what it was trying to tell you. The room came apart. Dale stood so fast his chair hit the wall. You gave it away? $500 million and you gave it to a trust? That was ours. Roth buttoned his coat, collected his check, and walked out without a word. The way a man leaves a table when the game is over and there's no point being angry at the cards. Marcus sputtered and threatened. Vivian cried quietly, the fight gone out of her. I gathered my one folder, slid my chair in, and stood. I put my hand on the door, and the door opened from the other side. My father walked into the room. My mother walked in behind him. Both of them tanned, thinner, very much alive. The shouting stopped like a switch had been thrown. I just stood there with my hand still on the door, looking at the man I had half buried in my heart all winter. They had come down from the Kabuk a week ago, the moment the rivers opened. They'd been watching, piecing together everything from Joe, from Hannah's trust file. Because the whole thing, the off-grid winter, the silence, the cruel lopsided distribution, had been built. A test. My father looked at the room and said it plainly. I found the richest thing of my life 40 years ago. And I spent 40 years deciding which of my children I could trust to leave it in the ground. He looked at me. Now I know. Hannah then told the room the thing my father had folded into the original instrument that none of us had seen. A backstop. A standing direction. The moment anyone moved to sell or mine that parcel, the mineral estate would divert into the land trust on its own. Beyond reach. He had never truly gambled his life's work on me guessing right. He'd made certain the ground was safe no matter what happened. Then his eyes found me. And I want to tell you it was a perfect reunion. That I melted. That I forgave everything on the spot. I didn't. I looked my father dead in the eye. This man I loved more than my own breath. And I said, you let me think you were dead to see if I'd sell your grave. My voice didn't shake. I passed. But you don't ever get to test love, Dad. Not mine. Not again. The fallout was quiet. Real consequences usually are. Dale dropped the lawsuit within the month. You can't fund 5 years of litigation to win a fortune that no longer exists. The Miami house went on the market to cover his legal fees. Marcus' development deal collapsed. Roth found some other valley to want. And the land, the creek, the spruce flats, the $500 million sleeping in the dark beneath it, stayed exactly where it was. Protected forever. Stewarded by people who measure wealth in caribou and clean water instead of dollars. Part of it open for subsistence use and cultural study, the way my father always wanted. My parents and I started the slow work of being a family again. I didn't forgive the test quickly. I made them earn their way back, conversation by hard conversation. But some nights, my father would sit on my porch in the long summer light, and he would tell me that I had done the one thing he had hoped for. And some nights, that was enough. I sent Vivian's kids' school a quiet check, with no name on it. Some things you keep. Some things you give away. He taught me both. I went back to Caribou Bend and reopened my survey office. But now, alongside the boundary lines and the plat work, I help other people protect their land the way I protected my father's. Conservation easements. Mineral conveyances. The careful paperwork that keeps a place from being spent. The creek behind my house still groans all night under its ice. I sleep better than I have in years. My father didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a question. What are you willing to protect? When no one is watching, and no one will ever pay you for it. The only way to pass was to answer it before anyone could reward you for the answer. And if someone in your life has measured you by what you'd sell instead of what you'd protect, let this be your reminder. Your worth was never theirs to set. By the way, where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments, because it's amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world.